everyone. This is J.D. Seal, Vice President of SkyView Partners, and I want to welcome you today to our session on the top 10 new features of IBM I security presented by Carol Woodbury. In this session, the latest IBM I security features are discussed. There have been several enhancements that were provided in V6R1 and V7R1. In addition, there's been several important enhancements that have been added in the technology releases since V7R1. Today's session is sponsored by SkyView Partners. We're happy to do that. We're happy to have you all here. At SkyView Partners, we're committed to delivering products and services that not only provide our customers with sound advice, but also saves them time, reduces the cost, and simplifies the management of security compliance and daily security administration for both IBM I and AIX. Today's presenter is Carol Woodbury, co-founder, president, and CTO of SkyView Partners. Prior to forming SkyView, Carol spent 16+ years at IBM in positions including Chief Engineering Manager and Security Architect for IBM's iSeries Security Group. Carol's also the author of the book IBM I Security, Administration, and Compliance, now available on MC Press Online. SkyView Partners delivers many software solutions that can be a great assistance to you. Please keep these in mind. The SkyView Risk Assessor software, an automated and independent vulnerability assessment from the experts. Our SkyView Policy Minder software, automated security administration tool to make sure your security configuration stays the way your security policy intends, always important. The SkyView Audit Journal Reporter for IBM I, predefined auditor-ready reports on the security events recorded in the Audit Journal, makes it easy to get that information out of the Audit Journal. And our new SkyView Policy Minder for IBM AIX examines your security configuration and compares it to your policy and features universal script management to centralize control of script execution across multiple servers through a single web-based console. And remember, now at SkyView Partners, all of our software is available at an unlimited software license. Services available from SkyView Partners include the SkyView Security Checkup for IBM I and AIX. You can outsource your vulnerability scanning and assessments. The SkyView Managed Services for compliance reporting, as well as re-architecture and remediation services that are available on a statement of workspaces. So with that, I want to pass along the presentation to this morning's session on top 10 new features of IBM I security to our presenter this morning, Carol Woodbury. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me. All right. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 features, and I might have thrown in more than 10. I didn't keep real close track. There's at least 10, but I think there's closer to 12 or 13 in here. The first section that we're going to talk about are those enhancements that came in during the V7 timeframe. Now, V7 actually didn't produce a lot of security changes or enhancements. So the majority of them that came in a major release was actually in V6. But there have been a number of things that have come in since V7 was announced and shipped in these things called a technology release. So if you're not staying up to date and if you are only looking for major system announcements, version releases, you're missing out on some very cool technology that is being released through these technology releases. And the good news for us is that us as consumers of this technology, we don't have to wait until the next version comes out. IBM is giving us this information and giving us this technology now to consume and take advantage of. And so, if you're only looking for the major version releases, you're missing out. So I would encourage you to start looking for that information in the form of the technology release. Okay. So the first thing that we are going to look at are these system values. They're kind of some funky system values, and they control the SSL ciphers on your system. Now I'm actually going to switch over to the actual system, and we'll do this. So here are the system values from an iSeries or IBM I system. So if we take a look at what these do, This is really the system value here. This first system value that we're looking at really says who is going to control which protocols are available on the system. Is it going to be the user or the operating system? And so that's what this little code means, OPSYS. Okay, so the operating system is going to control that, and that's the default for that. The other thing that you can do is basically control which order the buffers are used in, and so that one is controlled by this next one up, the middle one. And again, you can either have it be user-defined, or as it ships from IBM, the operating system is going to control it. And then finally, you have the ability to control, or in this case, the system is controlling what my cipher suite looks like. Now, why do you care? In some cases, you may care because you are talking to some other location that has a specific requirement for a strength of the encryption when you communicate to that other entity. So perhaps a bank or some sort of trading partner has a requirement, or you may want to levy a requirement on your connections coming into this system. And so that's when you would definitely want to be controlling these cipher suites. And so you can see what is going to start negotiating first, and you may actually want to remove some of these cipher suites if they are typically, you remove them if they are too weak for your standards. Okay, so this control came in V6R1. Now, what came in V7, actually it was one of the technology releases, is support for, and actually it was just the latest technology release 6. So IBM is now supporting TLS version 1.1 and TLS version 1.2. So TLS is really the standardized version of SSL, all right? So the issue with these two protocols, these brand new protocols, is that not many people that you're going to be talking to, or not many systems that you're going to be talking to, necessarily support these protocols yet. And so some devices do, some servers don't, so obviously you have to be careful if these are the ones that you're going to require. You may not be able to talk to all the servers that you want to talk to. So you just have to make sure that you can negotiate the protocols and make sure that the other side talks the same, basically the same language as your servers and your requirements. But it is good news that they have provided this support. The other thing that they did in this technology release is to be able to allow you to control the strength of the encryption. In other words, that is supported by applications. So for example, you may require one strength of encryption when using FTP, but a different one when you're using Telnet. And that was never available before. It was one size fits all, and you got what you got via those system values. But now in DCM, or Digital Certificate Manager, and that's where you control the certificate assignments. So if you have a requirement to have an encrypted Telnet session, for example, one of the steps that you have to go through is to excuse me, assign the certificate to the Telnet server and you do that in DCM. So now when you assign that certificate, one of the other things that you will be able to do is to configure the cipher or the strength of that encryption algorithm. So that's pretty cool. That explanation of this new support has just been written about a month ago in one of the blogs on IBM Systems Magazine, and so I've put the URL up there. Now, before all of you flood our poor chat box with questions about handouts, yes, when you get a link to the recording for this webinar, you'll also get a link to the handouts that you can download this. So you'll get the URL that way. Okay, So that's new encryption support. And that was V6 and technology release 6. Okay, moving right along. The one thing that really did come in V7 proper are some new user profile parameters. So if we take a look at that, they're at the very end of when you create a user profile. So if we go to create user profile and we go all the way to the end here, you can see there are 2 new parameters. These parameters are there so that you can do a better job or not waste so much time when you are creating user profiles. And the whole idea with this is that you may have contractors coming in, you may have some sort of temporary, perhaps seasonal workers coming in, and you know that those profiles that you're creating at that point in time are going to be temporary. So what you can do is put an expiration date if you want to, and you can, so if you know that they're coming in perhaps over the Christmas season, when you create those profiles, you can say that they expire January 5th of the next year or something like that. So automatically on that date, those profiles will be set to a status of disabled. So again, that's a way that you can reduce risk to your system so that when those profiles are no longer needed, you don't have to remember to go in and set those to disabled. You can automatically have that done by the operating system. So that was a good thing to be added in V7. Okay, the next thing that was added, and this came in technology release, I think that this came in technology release 5. So I just wrote a white paper on this, and some of you may have seen this, and it's documented on this next page. But what this is the ability to control access through these things called a function usage, or the easier way to remember this and configure it is through application administration. So let me show you what that looks like. Application administration is a part of iSeries Navigator. So there's a couple ways that you can get to it. You can either right-click on the system name after you open up application administration, or rather iSeries Navigator. You can right-click, or there is a task under the task list that you can click on. And when you do that, you get up a box that looks like this. Now the first thing, by default, you first see this first tab, and this allows you to configure what part of iSeries Navigator somebody sees. All right, so you can have all of your end users not see any part of iSeries Navigator when they launch it except perhaps the basic operations. And then client applications, but what we're going to focus on today, because the additions that came in are under the host tab. Now what was added is under the database. So one of my favorite parts of application administration is under this all object tab, and it allows you to grant users that have job control the ability to see the job log of an all object user. So that's been there for quite a while. But they added the database tab, and under the database tab there are 2 things of quite interest, I think, that you will be interested in. One is the ability to control who can use DDM or DRDA, and the other one is under this toolbox application server access, which is a fancy name for controlling ODBC access. Now the cool thing with this is that you can either say that nobody can use it, so that's what this default access is, and just allow all object users. So basically you're shutting it off for everybody except all object users. But you can customize the access. So the customize access is, you click on this customize tab, and you can say by group or by user who can use ODBC. Now the interesting thing with this is that, well, let me step back. So you can control access and say that I've unchecked the box that says default access, so by default nobody can use it except users with all object. except the users that are explicitly allowed or the groups that are allowed. Okay, so you can control access here. But this is an all or nothing. So it's an on or off switch for these users. So by default, nobody will be able to get into this except for these users, Carol and whoever's a member of the application development group. All right, so it's on or off. For some people, this will be the control that you want. For some people, this will not be granular enough because there's no way to be able to control access for allow some file use through ODBC or not. So this is truly an on-off switch. If you need more granularity through this, then you'll need to use one of the ExaPoint software vendor solutions like Celasoft or something. Okay, so now the interesting thing with this is that you may not want to use this for control, or maybe you do, but one of the things that you may want to use it for is just to see who's using these functions. So who is using DDM or DRDA and or and I have to tell you that on most systems this will probably be a huge eye-opener to find out who is using these. So the way that you find out who's using these is that once you put a rule in any of these boxes, then the operating system knows to log the access in the audit journal. So how does that manifest itself? It manifests itself as a GR entry in the audit journal. And so in the next version of our Audit Journal Reporter product, we have a report that will allow you to report on who is using the function. So I've filtered this out to only look at ODBC access. But you can see this is pretty cool because it will tell you whether the action is a read or a change, and it will also tell you whether it is a pass or a fail. And so you can find out who is using this function. Now we have one client that's going to use this function simply to find out what processes are using ODBC. I'm sorry, not ODBC, but DDM. They're about to implement secure DDM and require a password on a DDM connection. And so they want to make sure that they have found all the areas that might be using DDM right now. So they're going to use this function to do that. So not only can you control access, but it can also be used to find out who's actually using these functions ahead of time. So some way cool function that came in Technology Release 5. So that's what this function usage is. So also let me step back and explain to you what function usage is. And you can blame this the security team that was in place when I was a team leader. If you look at what these functions are doing, what all of these things control, they're actually controlling the ability to perform some function. And most of the time when you're controlling access or controlling somebody's ability to do something, you just secure the command. Like if you don't want them to display the contents of a library, you can either secure down the display library command, or you secure the actual library itself. Well, if you think about it, none of these items have an object to secure, but you want to control access to perform the function. So that's how this name came about as function usage, controlling the usage of a function. So not necessarily the most usable name, but that's where it came from, and that's what it's controlling. But truly the easiest way to control this is through application administration rather than the function usage commands. So as I said, I wrote a white paper on controlling items through application administration. You can request that if you want to. Also, the configuration of these functions have been available and reported on in Risk Assessor for quite a while. And the audit journal entries, as I said, will be in the next version of Audit Journal Reporter. Okay, so enough with application administration. The other thing that was added in a technology release and via some PTF, so it was actually PTF backwards, are some new values for the CD audit entry type. Now the CD audit entry is the one that reports on the commands that have been entered. So if you enable command, you can't enable it at the system level, but if you enable it at the user level, then in the audit journal it will contain entries that are a CD type entry, and that CD entry lists the actual command string that was entered. The problem with that entry is that it is incredibly broad. There is prior to these new entry types, there was an indication whether the command was entered and run from a CL program, and then the rest was kind of everything else. So if you think about it, everything else can contain not just commands run from a command line, but it could also perhaps be in a batch program or in a Rex program, and it was really difficult to just narrow it down and have a meaningful report of what was actually entered from a command line. So now some new sub-entry types were added, or rather not entry types were added, but in the field that's called run from a CL program, it doesn't just contain a yes or a no, but it has a Y or an N. It has some other types of values in here so that you can find out if it was perhaps a CL command that was run in batch mode or interactive and so forth. So what we've done in our Audit Journal Reporter product is to have a specific report specifically for the commands that were run in interactive mode. And that produces a much more meaningful report rather than having one that includes all information. You can still get that report, but most people have switched to look at this, the one that just lists the ones that are in interactive mode. Okay, the next thing that has been added, again in a technology release, is the FIELDPROC support. And I'm not going to go into a huge level of detail because there's been some good articles written and there have been some webinars given specifically on this support. If you haven't heard those, if you search for those, they were given by Patrick Townsend, and he's done a really good job of explaining what the FIELDPROC support does. But in a nutshell, IBM added the ability, and they call it column-level encryption support. So basically, it's an exit point out of that gets called specifically for data in a specific column that has been defined to be FIELDPROC enabled, if you will. And one of the biggest usages of the FIELDPROC support is the column level encryption. Now IBM calls it column level encryption, but that's a little bit of a misnomer because it's not like it's automatic for you. You, in your exit program that is defined for this exit point, you have to do the encryption yourself. So it's not like the operating system is automatically encrypting the contents of that column. You have to plug in an encryption routine. And again, if you've heard me talk about encryption, I am not a believer that you should try to roll your own encryption routine. We have very fine vendors out there that support encryption on IBM I, and I suggest that you use one of those if you're going to do an encryption project. But it has provided those vendors with the ability to do some clever things with the encryption support, and it can significantly reduce the size of an encryption project. You have to put a little bit of thought into it when they talk about it being automatic, your your exit program needs to have a few smarts built into it so that the information is not just automatically decrypted. It's great that it's automatically encrypted, but if somebody accesses the file and it's just automatically decrypted, you're not gaining much protection there. So you have to have some controls over who can see the decrypted data, and that has to be put in your exit program. Now, if you were doing an exit or an encryption project to begin with, that type of logic had to appear somewhere, and it typically was impacting your application program because the smarts had to be put in there as to who saw the decrypted data. So you're basically removing that burden from the application program and putting it in the exit program, the burden in the exit program. But again, my suggestion is that you don't try to roll your own on that one. The vendors have done a decent job of, good job of making that function available to you. So the other thing that was added in one of the more recent technology releases is the ability to provide even more granularity and not just decrypt data, but also to provide masking support. Because of course, if you're dealing with credit card information, you can have some of that information come back, but not all of it, and so that's called masking. So that support is now available. The final thing that was added in, again, one of the technology releases, I think this was technology release 5 as well, is the ability to have group entries in these things called a server authentication entry. Now, I referred earlier to a client that is starting a project to use password control on DDM connections. DDM over TCP/IP is a fairly open protocol when you don't require a password on the target system. And so one way to lock it down, or the way to lock it down, is to control and have a password required on the target system, as well as to define what the profile that you're going to connect to on that target system will be. One of the things of maintaining that is called a server authentication entry, and that's where you define what the connection will be, or what profile the connection on the target DDM system will be and who it will run as. So to do that, you create this server authentication entry. The problem is it's kind of hard to do because you have to say, for this individual, Carol, I'm going to connect as, let's say, the application profile. And then for John, you have to have another server authentication entry, and it is also going to connect as the application profile. And JD is going to connect. And so when you have thousands of users that may be connecting to a target system as a specific profile, it's hard to maintain. So now you can have a server authentication entry that lists a group, and so that means that anybody in that group will connect as whatever is defined on that server authentication entry. So that has made that much easier to maintain. And the server authentication entries have been listed in Risk Assessor for quite a while. So if you're looking for those, that's a good place to look. So that's what's been added in version 7 and the technology releases. Now, for me, the way to keep up on the technology releases and to find all of the information about the technology releases, and I've added this URL to our last page so that you don't have to try to scramble and write this down. But if you search for the technology updates, this is where all of them are listed, and the majority of the technology releases with the security enhancements have actually been under the technology updates. The database team in Rochester has been working overtime to do a lot of enhancements for us in these technology releases. So kudos to them, and all of these things are fully documented, and here they are very specifically listed out for the security enhancements. And there's some that I haven't listed. Some were put in that are more tuned for the vendors so that they can take advantage in their products and then also obviously help you with that. But all of them are very clearly outlined in the link shown here under security enhancements. So I encourage you to go to this website and read more about these. Okay, getting into the V6 enhancements. So one of the things that has always been frustrating to me is the lack of visibility into the service tool IDs, or we might know them as the SST users. So a while ago, back when I was still at IBM, the ability was put into SST, the service tool function, that you had to have a service tool ID defined before you could get into service tools. But there was no visibility into those service tool IDs. You had to actually log into service tools to find out what those were and what ones had been defined. In V6, we now have a command called display SST user that lists out all of the service tools, lists what functions they have been authorized and capabilities they have, the last time their password was changed, and whether it's a disabled profile. So this is a good one to maintain and keep current for your service tool IDs. And a lot of times this is one of the reports that we use in our risk assessor product, and when we do one of those security checkups, I often find service tool IDs either that are still set at the IBM defaults or service tool IDs that haven't been used for a long time and need to be cleaned up and so forth. So this is a good way to get visibility into your service tool IDs. Now some of the other things that were added in V6, and actually V6 of security function added, including some new system values. So we've talked about these in other webinars, so I'm not going to go into these in huge detail, but there were 3 system values related to passwords that were added. Password change block, which determines the length of time between password changes, so somebody can't just repeatedly change their password and get back to the same password they were using before. The expiration warning, which is how many days before a user is warned that their password needs to be changed, how long or far in advance they're warned of that. And then the password rules, and the password rules is a system value that allows you to define your password rules. I guess that's why it was called password rules. So this is where you can define maximum, and so instead of having all these new system values related to passwords, they, meaning IBM, has added the values that you can add to the password rules system value. Now, the rules that they added in V6 really should allow you to sync up with the rules that you would have at your network level, and that's really why they did it. So if you haven't taken a look at your password rules and you have a disconnect between the rules that you have at your network and the rules that you have in your IBM I, this is a chance to get those in sync. The other thing is that this is probably the value you want to use if you're going to password level 2 or 3, which allows the upper and lower case, because this is where you can say you require any 3, meaning an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a special character, or a digit. So 3 of those 4 types of characters in the password composition. So you can have a lot of control over these rules. And if you're really a very cruel administrator, you can really make your end user's life difficult. Now, that might seem funny, but if you do that, they're probably going to be calling the help desk, and the help desk will come and find you. So really don't want to make this too cruel, or make it so that they have to write this down. So one of the things you want to take a look at once you get these handouts is that if you start using the password rule system value, these other passwords system values are ignored. So basically you need to put excuse me, all of your password composition rules in that password composition rule system value, or else these become ignored. So you may think you have some rules in place and you might not actually have them in place. So just make sure that you take a look at the rules that will be ignored, or the system values that will be ignored, and put those rules all in the password rules system value. Okay, this system value is not new. Everybody's saying, well, this isn't new. You're right, it's not new. But there are new capabilities associated with the system value. Before it was you can allow users to have one device, or the value of 0 was unlimited numbers of devices. They have added the values of 2 through 9. So users can now have between 1 and 9. And so this has now become a system value that is much more usable for a lot more of you. I found in talking to a lot of you, you just couldn't use it because the majority of your users needed at least 2 sessions. Well, now you can put 2 at the system value, and of course you can always override that at the user profile level. So this again has become a much more usable system value than it was before. Okay, so this is just a shot of the system value. So a couple new parameters were added to the system value, or I'm sorry, to the user profile, create and change user profile. So the thing that was added is the block password change. So you can override this at the user profile level. And again, the target of this capability is really the person that has access to the change password command and can repeatedly change their password. You know, in theory, nobody would do that, but in practice, some people do. So what you can do is either specify at the system value or in selected user profiles the number of hours that are required. Now, of course, you as an administrator can always use the change user profile command and change their passwords, so it's not like the password can't be changed at all. It's just that as the user themselves. And of course, IBM also made the change to the limit device session that is in the user profile, not just the system values. So they added those new values to the system value or to the user profile as well. Now, something else that was added to V6 and V7 is a PTF that allows you to get the disk sanitizer. The disk sanitizer is basically needed if you are going to return your, and you may have requirements that you need to overwrite your data. Basically, this is used if you have a data classification requirement that says that your data needs to be erased before returning it to IBM or to your supplier of some nature. This is a great thing to do whether you have that policy in place or not. This ensures that your data is not recoverable from that disk. Obviously, you're only going to run this when you are exchanging your hardware. Because otherwise, obviously, your data is gone and you're in for a full system restore. But this does meet the DoD requirement, so for some of you, this will be a requirement, and so it's good that they have added this both into V6 and V7. Now, another thing that IBM added in V6 is on the restore object and save object commands. Many of you know that if you have restored an object and it has been secured with private authorities, that when you restore that object to a different system, those private authorities don't come with the object. So in V6, there is a parameter that is added called private authorities. So when you restore the object, if you say private authorities yes, then you will be able to associated with that object. Now, to have this work, obviously, you have had to have saved the private authorities with the object as well. Now, this, I don't recommend that you change the defaults and have your backups save the private authorities with the objects. It's going to increase the time of your backups. This is kind of that onesie, twosie, I have to save an object from this system and restore it onto another system. That's the time that you want to use this function. So it's very specialized when you want to do this. The time that you save your private authorities is when you do the save sec data, save security data. That's when private authorities are normally saved, and that's where you should keep that function, because that saves your private authorities, also saves your authorization lists, also saves your user profiles. So rather than changing and saving it with the object all the time at your backup time, if you do that, use this function sparingly, and when you have a specific reason to take one object from one system and restore it onto another. But at least the function is there, and that will save you some time that way. The other thing that was done in V6 is a change to the copy to stream file and copy to import file commands. And the time that you care about this is when you are working with objects in the IFS. Many of the objects that are written to the IFS either are using the copy to import file or copy to stream file functions. And prior to V6R1, you had no choice as to what the authorities were set once the command was run. The owner had read, write, execute, public was set to exclude. If you had authorities set at the directory, none of those directory authorities were inherited and so forth. In V6, IBM has added the ability to have that authority on the object IFS. That authority can now come from another number of different places, including the directory into which it's being created. So that will solve a lot of the authority problems in the IFS. So I encourage you to take a look at this function that came in V6R1. There is also some new function that came in V6 and has been enhanced through some of the technology releases, and that's the ability to log the actual statements that are run once a user types in start SQL. And in one of the technology releases, they added some better logging for query 400 usage. So if somebody does work query, you don't know what they do once they do work query. So both the start SQL and work query now have better logging, so you can know what query they're working with or what SQL statements have been executed. So to which we were pretty much blind before that. So several of the vendors have taken advantage of that to provide you with better logging usage of those commands. So that has really helped the system. Now, last but certainly not least, in V6, the hardware storage protection that has been building throughout the releases even was taken advantage of even more in V6R1, and that's really why some of the retranslation had to take effect and had to occur when you're crossing that boundary between V5R4 and V6R1. There was a little bit of hassle that went on, but certainly not the same as the migration from sys to RISC. But that really happened so that the operating system could take better advantage of this thing called hardware storage protection. And basically the net of it is that all of us are better protected from systems, rather programs that are trying to masquerade as IBM programs or are trying to modify the operating system or the slick level. It just has, the operating system has further tightened itself. It put on yet another layer of armor so that we can be assured that the operating system has not been changed out from under us. It adds even more protection from a virus protection point of view, because it adds yet another layer that says that user-written programs can't modify IBM objects. Only IBM objects can modify, only IBM programs can modify IBM objects and so forth. So great news out of IBM. They continue to invest in that type of hardening of the operating system. So we all should be thankful that they think that this is important. And this is one of the reasons why we all love IBM I, and the value proposition is there because of the protection that they continue to do. And we don't have to worry about those viruses in the wild. Okay, so I've compiled a list of places that you can go for the information that I've talked about today. Here's the white papers. We have a number of white papers on our website that you might find interesting. My book available from MC Press. The technology updates, again, that's the URL to get to the technology updates, the link that I showed you earlier to the IBM website, and the IBM Information Center for V7R1 is there. And obviously, if you have other questions, you are more than welcome to contact us directly or your authorized reseller. And with that, I will turn it over to JD.
Wow, what a great presentation. I'm sure everyone enjoyed that. We do have a few minutes, so if anyone has specific questions that they'd like to type into the GoToWebinar dialog box, we may be able to get to a few of those. While we're giving you a couple of minutes to type in your question, let me take you back to the SkyView Partners website. These Coffees with Carol are sponsored from SkyView Partners, and we're happy to help you. One of the things we've talked a lot about with customers recently is doing a security checkup. And there are many, many laws and regulations governing your security configuration settings, but most every one of them requires some kind of regular vulnerability review of your security environment. And that's exactly what a SkyView Security Checkup is designed for. You will be given the ability to run the SkyView Risk Assessor software on your system and send those reports to SkyView for SkyView's experts to review. We will set up a conference call with you to go over those results, and we will help you rank your risks in a high, medium, and low scenario so that you can know what you need to address in a priority manner, as well as give you a deliverable at the end, which is our observations and our recommendations. So if you would like to take advantage of the SkyView Security Checkup service, is something we are doing a lot of right now. So please contact SkyView Partners or your authorized SkyView reseller, and we'd be happy to help you do that.